hopefully it will give you the opportunity to get exposure to lots of different people and hear their experiences. So we look forward to welcoming you to that particular event. So I'll introduce our guest today, Daniel. So Daniel Cabinet is the General Manager of People and Culture at Myer. As we have all seen over the COVID period, the retail sector has had to be agile in responding to health regulations and COVID outbreaks. The ability to lead and manage a workforce of approximately 13,000 employees is a big gig. And Daniel will share some of his experiences and learnings with us today. However, Myer represent a fascinating case study in many different ways. They have been sold out of the old Coles Myer. They've been acquired by private equity. They have refloated on the ASX, and we think have been one of the highest profile organisations impacted by disruption. Daniel has played an increasingly more important role during these significant change moments, responding to disruption and leading and managing the HR team through these challenges. Daniel is a HR retailer with his professional career committed to the retail sector. He's worked across nearly all of the HR disciplines and now has responsibility for people and culture across Myer. He's managed to live through the turbulence of COVID and leads Myer into the new normal. When we created the concept of the disruption circle, we had in mind certain organisations who are experiencing disruption on a major scale. Our interest was in understanding the impact of people and how organisations manage that impact. Myer was one of the organisations we wanted involved. So I'm very pleased Daniel can join us today. Please welcome Daniel.
Thank you, Damian. Terrific introduction. Really sums up the journey of Myer in a very short and brief intro. But thank you for this opportunity and good afternoon, everyone. I might just start off with a little bit of my history, which Damian's already alluded to, which has been 20 years in retail. I love retail. I'll be the first to say that it's a dynamic place to be working in. And over the 20 years, as you can imagine, there's been an enormous amount of change in retail from being a very much, box and bricks and mortar industry to now really, very much so. Many organisations have streamed out to into the online and digital space. And in fact, if you don't have a digital or online offer, you're probably not around at the moment. So I think the emergence of that is really important in retail. Prior to Myer, the last 9 years I spent at Myer, and as Damian alluded to, in various senior roles. I was with Coles Myer and the Wesfarmers Group. Again, had seen an enormous amount of change when Wesfarmers came into the Coles acquisition of Coles Myer. But I might just talk about initially the journey of Myer over in the period that I've been there, particularly that I know of, because Myer's is quite as Damian said, a very prolific employer. I always thought it was a barometer for the retail industry. Quite often, it's one of those places that's always in the media, as we know, for good reasons, for bad reasons. We know that it's a love-hate relationship almost with the media that we have, and also our customer. Our customer either, we've got some very loyal customers, as we know, that love Myer as a business, and I think over time we've actually seen the changes of Myer really take impact, particularly online. It's fair to say that as we've emerged over the years, Myer has now, it's no longer, when I first started there, DJs was the competitor. We were obsessed with DJs and trying to beat DJs. And of course that was, that has changed over the years, where retail's become a lot more global, online. Now our competitors are basically everyone. I mean, every retailer in some regards has an impact on Myer, and Myer probably have an impact on them. So I think in that time, I've also seen the three different CEOs, but with three very different transformational plans as well. When I first started Myer, we had Bernie Brooks. Bernie Brooks was very much a statesman of the industry. That was post the floating of Myer in 2009, and become a public company. Come 2015, Bernie had left. In came Richard Umbers as a CEO. Richard introduced the concept of new Myer, trying to make Myer more relevant to the current customer. And that meant that, department stores, that model really had to change shape, really look into technology as the new solution. And actually, he floated, well, I should say, went for a capital raising of about $600 million to try and get some injection of cash into Myer so that we can actually start investing in our online model. That didn't really work, unfortunately, and then John King came in 2018. John King with substantial overseas experience, obviously with other department stores such as House of Fraser. And he came in with the view to starting to consolidate space. And what I mean by that, by closing stores, cutting really overhead costs, particularly at support office, and really introducing new brands into the business. So we went from, having very much a focus on what we call our exclusive brands, so Myer-led brands, to bringing in some overseas brands which people couldn't actually access in Australia. And in particular, growing our online and digital function. I might ask Damian to share a screen on the screen our customer first plan. I just wanted to share this with everyone because it's fairly simple. This is something that John King actually introduced to the business, and he said, "Look, I don't think we need to actually look at becoming too complicated with retail. It really is just focusing on three main priorities." And you can see those three main priorities. The first one is being transforming the customer experience in store. And I think we've got to recognise that despite the growth of online, stores, bricks and mortars is still predominantly what Myer retails in, what Myer stands for. But we needed to make sure that the experience for the customer was compelling. The second one was having the only at Myer brands and categories and value for money. So that's where I spoke about the fact that we now focus on other brands that aren't accessible in Australia, rather than going for just the Myer brands. And the third one being the continuing enhancement of our myer.com.au. Obviously, that's been a key. And again, without having that in play in 2008, we wouldn't be here today with a compelling online offer as we have. And you can see that the bottom row there, the fourth ones, are really what we call the efficiency drivers that we needed to actually in place. So simplified business processes, working smarter, efficient factory to customer, and I could talk about that in terms of how that has partnered our online function, and finally the accelerated cost reduction. So we wanted to spend prudently. So if I start talking about our online offer, because that's really been the big change for Myer over the years and how that's actually played in COVID. Our online offer is now worth is about $500 million per annum generation. So that's now 20% of our revenue is from online. And if you think about that from, say, something like 10 years ago, where we didn't have an online, to now to being 20% of our business, you've got to say it's a significant change. And it's nothing to ignore. Obviously, it's grown for us. It's almost grown to 200% year on year. If I think about Black Friday last year, Black Friday was our biggest online week, even though it was just a day, Black Friday. It was actually our biggest trade week we've ever had. We actually do that every week now, a Black Friday. So we've gone from seeing, and I'll be with much anticipation waiting for this Black Friday to see what that will deliver. But if you think about what we do now, we really have a significant online offer, which has to be met with our labour and our labour plans. We're also supporting that with obviously our fulfilment function. So our DCs, we're starting to build a new DC in Ravenhall to actually support that function with all the state-of-the-art technology that will come into play, and that we hope to be operating from 2022. If I can talk about what's happened, so that's really been the journey of Myer. If I could just say briefly what that has been. Myer's really gone through a transformation, which when we speak about being in a COVID normal world, I think COVID normal world, what that means is really it's going to be incumbent of Myer to continue to grow that online function and make sure it's its leaders, its HR departments are going to find ways and look for ways to innovate, such that COVID really now no longer becomes a battleground or the war that we need to actually face into. The real war now becomes back clearly focused on the customer, and in particular, what I'd call the keyboard customer online for Myer. We know that the retail industry has been under enormous transformation and restructure, and retail has become one of the most difficult industries hit by COVID. And to navigate over the last 18 months has really needed some really strong leadership. Myer actually lost 2,000 days of trade last year when you think about the fact that we trade across 60 stores in our network. And of those days, we weren't able to trade our stores. So as I reflect on the last 18 months and the impacts of the workforce dynamics, I really focus on the fact that there are 3 key points that I have seen change the way we operate. And the first is the impact of COVID generally, and in particular on workforce engagement and turnover and attraction. And I don't think I'm going to be the only person who can say here to say staffing right now is a real challenge. And we've just seen it as we've opened up our New South Wales stores post the lockdown. The attraction and trying to get enough staff in has been really difficult, to the point where we've actually had to change our trading hours or shorten our trading hours so we actually had staff coverage to open our stores. So that's the first issue we've seen is from a staffing perspective. The second, which I've already alluded to, is the growth of our online and digital as a solution, and how the growth of online has actually become a survival strategy for Myer. I can recall going back probably 3 or 4 or 5 years, towards that time period where we were still emerging as an online retailer. I still feel that our online function or our online capability was held together by sticky tape and the like. We've really had to invest into that system to make it a viable system. And the third and one of the most important things that I am focusing on as a HR leader, and I'm sure a lot of people are, is protecting the health and well-being of our team. And the expectations, I've got to say, that are now on employers to have systems in place to mitigate this as an attraction and retention strategy, actually, because the emergence of mental health strategies and well-being strategies is now key to actually to the way you actually run your business. And I use this term that the customer now is not always right. When you see that there's aggressive customer issues that come into play more and more, people have a pent-up frustration with the lockdowns and COVID. One thing that we as retailers, and particularly our HR department and our safety departments for that matter, really have to have a focus on how do we protect our team members, how do we protect our team members from confrontations for that matter, but also to make sure that they feel safe when they come into the workplace in light of COVID as well. So I'm not just only talking about here the making sure that you've got social distancing in place and other mechanisms to keep your customers and your team members safe. But I'm talking about the more visible issues that can emerge from here, which is aggressive customers, and making sure that you are actually able to mitigate some of those issues as much as you can. So that's been a real emergence for us over the last couple of months to try and make sure that we've got those strategies in place. Damian, I'm just concentrating on time. Continue on.
You're all right. You're fine, Daniel.
So I think where I started the journey back with COVID, if I could say, as a company, was back in March last year, 2020. We were one of the first companies at that point. There were a couple of emerging issues, as you imagine, from COVID. Seems like a lifetime ago this is happening. But we started seeing the emergence of these sporadic outbreaks of COVID. People wondering what to do. Government was very on top of saying, stay home, people, please don't go to shops. We were able to trade. But of course, we also saw this as a bit of a health and safety issue for our team. Whilst we hadn't had any, any outbreaks that we could, or any issues that result in closures of stores, we were very conscious that this was an emerging issue. We made an agonising decision at that point to actually close our stores and stand down our team, some 10,000 employees at that point, to say, we're not going to trade from the next Monday. That was on a Friday evening, I remember. It was made with a lot of trepidation, I've got to say, when we made that decision, because we knew that we were going to be the first in that media to say Myer are closing their stores. And we're also conscious of the ability to do that or to implement that in light of the Fair Work Act and the provisions around stand down, because we really didn't have a clear, what I would call legal position, other than the fact that we wanted to protect our team members from health and safety. We were able to still trade at that point and protect our customers as well. But we felt that public sentiment would be on our side. And in fact, it wasn't only public sentiment, it was our own team members who were feeling the anxiety of turning up to work when all this was happening, and we still had the early days of what does this mean to people. And that was also pre-JobKeeper, I've got to say. So we did that with the understanding that this was going to be a huge impact on our team. We were prepared for it. We obviously worked very closely with even the union to make sure we had to have a system which would help our team members through that process. And of course, JobKeeper came in at that point, introduced the JobKeeper scheme, and that really helped us to overcome that issue around how we're going to keep our team engaged, because it was only a short period at that point that we had to close our stores, probably about 6 weeks, as I recall. And of course, you wanted to be ready to open up your stores again. And the only way you could do that was to maintain engagement with your team members. So JobKeeper really helped us through that process. As time went on, we saw the restrictions, the stage 3 restrictions being introduced into Victoria. We didn't anticipate, I've got to say, the strong growth of our online function, that people just went straight onto online to do their buying. Even where in states where they could actually go into our store, online just became the point that people started going to buy stuff. So it really became a 100% online retailer during this period, Myer. And the irony is that with COVID, particularly for discretionary retailers like Myer, is that if you didn't have a feasible online offer, you would die. And we did actually see that, as you know, with a lot of the high street operators and boutique retailers who really hadn't invested in their online function. They're not around anymore, many of them, because of that. They were caught between the devil and the deep blue seas, I'd say, in not having an effective online solution. The great thing we did was we really backed our team to actually continue to come back into work. We had to actually, whilst we're running our click and collect service and our online function, we actually stood up another 2,000 or 3,000 employees. So it's interesting how that actually, we found our situation where we stood down our teams, but we had to actually bring them back, a good proportion of them, to make sure that we could support the online. And so that was really a challenge in itself, because people are sitting down, taking a good salary, dare I say, from JobKeeper without needing to work. And all of a sudden, our next challenge is how do we actually get them back to work? So the shift from this growth into in our online presence really needed us to get the support of our team members, and we did that. We actually engaged with them. We had really good communication channels, both through email, text, but also, face to face or across the phone is really important as well. We had to make sure, though, that they felt that they could return safely, and that was really important to our team, because they didn't want to come into an environment that they felt that they could potentially contract COVID. So we did put a lot of emphasis on their health and safety. We did see COVID as a health and safety issue, as opposed to a business or anything else issue, because we really wanted to focus on the fact that they could come in and feel that we had put in the appropriate measures for their safety. And I'll talk about some of the things that we did, particularly during that period of the stand down, to make sure that we engaged our team members in their own health and safety. And Damian, do you want to just show the next slide? What we did was we really focused on, and it was really simple things that we would send out to our team on a regular basis, on a weekly basis. Now, you've got to remember, these are team members who may not actually have the same access to people who sit in an office or sit at home and work in an office environment. but we made sure that we set up that they had a system which is we call now MCOMs or Myer comms, which we could push out these little I call them just well-being briefs, and they weren't about anything other than get your blood pumping, get some exercise. We had things like pull together your favorite playlist, things that would just focus them on other things other than I'm sitting at home and I'm unable to do anything. Connecting with people in other ways that you can. So we just kept the engagement going in that way. I think that really covers where we're at. When we came back to getting back people to work, I think we found that most people were prepared to come back to work because we kept that connection going. And of course, you just can't open a shop and all of a sudden have people back at work. We had to actually, we actually gave them some opportunities to do some workouts and what have you, so they can actually be physically prepared to come back to work as well. When you've been sedentary for 3 or 4 months and then you're asked to actually get up and start working, stocking shelves again, it's a massive challenge. So we did actually engage our team through that. But I think one thing I learned through the last 18 months is how difficult it's been to navigate through COVID, how much it's asked of our team, and I mean our broader team, to be flexible in the way they operate, to be, dare I say, a little bit more patient. And of course, to understand that these things are ongoing. I think we're going to have to, really focus on our team's well-being and just making sure that they are connected back with the business ongoing as well.
Thanks, Daniel. And I think you may have touched on the second phase of COVID, which is, what do they call it? The shadow pandemic, which is the mental health issue, which I think is going to be a big issue for not only Myer, but for the whole community. Yes, we kind of come to grips with whatever normal is going to look like, if there is a post-COVID world. Now, so we'll go into the Q&A piece now. I've got, if you like, 2 series of questions, some around retail and some specifically related to COVID. We start with the retail perspective. The bricks and mortar retail sector has felt the painful impact of disruption in a significant way. What have you seen as the main people challenges arising from this?
As I pointed out, I think the people have become a lot more educated and informed, and our employees have become a lot more educated and informed. We have seen a lot more choice. People have a lot more choice where they shop, where they actually, how they engage with an employer. The things that we have seen, the people challenges at Myer have really been about the fact that we've had to restructure our business quite considerably. And when you restructure a business through whether it's consolidation of space or because of cost pressures, you have to maintain a positive, some level of positivity that this is done for the benefit of the business to maintain, I guess, their engagement and the employment. And, retention through rewarding people has become a real way of life of how we actually deal with these matters. The other thing I would say is, as I alluded to, customer aggression is really important in this space. It's one of those areas that has been emerging over the last 2 years, which for retailers, not just Myer, but I'm sure many other bricks and mortar retailers, has been a real, confrontation, if I could say that, for our employees. And the way we manage that is to actually make sure that we give them tools that they can deal with those sort of situations as well. They're the main things that I found.
Yep. You touched on the challenging times Myer's been through in terms of its corporate ownership and trading performance. What have you learnt from this period in terms of managing change, leadership, and people engagement?
Yeah, we've obviously changed the constant. I think, as I mentioned, Myer has been under enormous transformation for the last 10 years, at least, even before that. And I think it's fair to say that the department store model is no longer what it used to be. And I think a lot of people look at the department stores, they look at their past and what the department store meant to them when they were growing up. And of course, for a lot of people, that was a great place. And Kate was talking about, it was a great place that you'd go and hang out and dwell, and you go to the cafe and go to the Christmas windows during Christmas, and all those sort of great, things that are emotional attachment that people would have. I think what we've found is change and newness is what people, particularly employees, want to see as well. They want to see visible change when I talk about change as well, that they're not just there doing a job. And people engagement is no longer just about an action. It's about an emotion and a value connection. People want to be, what I would say, employees particularly want to see that they are connected to the employer in some way rather than just this is a job. And to do that really takes leadership accountability. I think what we've found particularly under our latest CEO, and we make no bones about it, our support function, our support office has actually shrunk, quite considerably over the years. But you can't just do that without actually empowering people to make decisions and have great accountability as well. So whilst you can do that on the face of it and give people accountability and empowerment, you also have to actually equip them to be empowered as well. And I think that's been a real key to getting us to where we are now at Myer, obviously in much better shape for the future than what we have been in the past.
Just on that, equipping the people, Daniel, is that what kind of training or development do you kind of do implement or have your people involved with?
Yeah, I mean, training is really important, and I think cross-collaborative training is really important as well. I think we used to think about training just being in silos. You work in menswear, and you work in children's wear, or if you're in support office, you're a HR professional, and therefore you just work in that area. What we've tried to do over the years is make sure that everyone is cross collaboratively working and understanding the importance of that as well. We do a lot of what we'd call, and less so face to face, but we do a lot more online training. A lot of training also on change and resilience. I think that's really important these days because I think change and resilience is really the skill things you can teach people fairly easily on the job. But what you can't teach, I think, people, or what you can teach, but you can't actually, you need to actually develop more is the ability to deal with the change and to actually build some resilience, particularly in a world which is shifting very quickly, as we know. That's
why we've all got grey hair, Daniel.
Yeah, well, some of us are lucky to have hair these days.
Daniel, you're an experienced people and culture leader in retail. How do you see the retail operating model in the future? And we obviously touched on the online impact. But what are the possible implications for the skills development of your workforce? Then secondly, how do you address the skills imbalance? And how do you communicate all this change and keep the people engaged?
Great question. Because I think this is a $64 million or $1,000 question that we're all asking ourselves at the moment because the search for talent is really changing. And there's good things and bad things. I think we can all see now that working from home means that you could, particularly in sort of office environments and support office sort of environments, that you can widen your search in a way. We've got now people working in our digital space who are based in Perth, in Queensland.
John?
It doesn't mean, sorry?
All right.
No longer do you need to actually just be based in your support office. You can actually work now externally. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that you have to buy in talent and you have to retain talent. And I think buying in talent is the new frontier being digital, as I said, going global. People want more than just being a job these days. So the challenge will be how do you connect with your employee through values and the heritage of your business, if you've got that, to make sure they feel like they can make an impact on the job. So, we talk about the future will be that people are more informed. They want to know about the being sustainable, your business being sustainable, being values driven, what you can offer them, particularly as an employee. But of course, we've all heard about this, the Great Resignation that's probably around the corner. That's coming out of. It's already been emerged in the States. Now that may actually happen. We don't know, and I'd like to think that the impact of that may not necessarily hit us that hard. But I think when I look at retail, the big challenge that we will face into in the future is the flexibility of work means a lot of people can now work from home. Retail is not built to be able to work from home. You actually have to be in the workplace. So that gives people who are in retail the opportunity to now think about, well, I want flexibility in my work. I want to be able to sit at home and not need to commute to work every day. I want to be able to sit at home and earn my money at home while I'm at home, rather than needing to go and confront an aggressive customer on the floor. So the real challenge for retail is how do you actually offer people a compelling job, which is going to keep them engaged. You're going to have to look at how, as an employer, are you going to offer them flexibility in a way that allows them to be flexible, but they still have to actually work on the floor. And the third thing I'm going to talk about here is the new employee, I should say. They don't want to be. They have other things than just wanting to work in their life. They have a life outside of their life generally, more so than ever. They're connected to social media. They're receiving, they're seeing influencers every day. They want to be actually connected to the outside world as much as they are to their job as well. So, I think one thing with the employer is if you want to be a compelling employee, you have to actually offer something else to that employee than just a job.
Thanks, Daniel. Out of necessity, we've all become online shoppers. When normal, whatever that means, returns, what do you expect to see in terms of online versus in-store shopping? And what are the implications for your workforce? So I guess what I'm saying is, presumably your online sales at the moment are inflated versus obviously you're in store.
Yeah.
Whatever that balance settles back to, but and what's that going to mean for your workforce, do you think?
Yeah, look, I certainly think that, COVID's been the great disruptor, as we want to call it. It has been a shift to the keyboard customer online. The customer now can shop online before they go into a shop. And I think the compelling online offer is the new normal. You have to actually provide something online to keep a customer attracted to your business. But I don't believe bricks and mortar is dead. In fact, I think bricks and mortar will evolve into more of an experience of showcasing product and showcasing experiences that people can actually come into a shop, because we are after all social animals. We want to be engaged socially, not just online. So I don't think that we're going to see a workforce which is going to necessarily completely change away from bricks and mortars. I think bricks and mortar shopping is still going to be predominantly what Myer actually operates in. We'll just have a stronger online presence. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean for our job? I think that for our employees, I think that the emergence of this sort of like loyal employee of Myer, which we've seen quite over the years, the 50-year-old veterans, is probably not going to be what we see of the future. We're going to see a more mobile employee that comes into Myer. I think the mix between online and in-store is going to be pretty much sort of like, steadily growing over the years as people become more tech savvy and more engaged with their online offer. And I still think that, we'll see bricks and mortar shifting, will become smaller. Our footprint will become smaller in stores, but we'll still have a presence in every sort of like, suburb that emerges, or every CBD will still have that presence there.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. All right, well, we better get into thinking about COVID, given it's the topic of the month, the topic of the last 18 months anyway. You talked a little bit today about some of the challenges COVID's thrown at you in terms of what I was particularly interested in was just with lockdowns and then the outbreaks and then the different opening and operating conditions in different states. How have your workforce just dealt with all of that?
Yeah.
Given that you've got a lot of strongly influenced by unions in your workplace. I can imagine that it must be challenging.
It has been challenging. I think the inconsistency between the states and some of the very short timeframes we've had to reply to them or to put in action has been really challenging, to say the least. And you're always trying to second guess some of this, the legal implications or the industrial implications that come out of this. And I spoke earlier about standing down our team members at a time which was very early on for that to be done. And look, I think we have seen the emergence of, the closure of 60 stores at one point has really changed people and what they know about COVID. But I think it's really interesting that we have I mentioned earlier the mandatory vaccinations that have come in now for New South Wales have impacted us significantly, because we had to actually close some of our training hours or shorten our training hours at this point in time. Now that will change obviously over time as well. So some states haven't really felt the impact of COVID as much as, say, a Melbourne or Victoria, I should say. You think about WA, I don't think we've had a really since about 12 months or maybe more, had a day we've had to have a closure, and yet in Victoria we still have our team at home. So just a challenging environment. I'm sure that everyone is operating in if they've got a national presence, a national footprint across Australia. The one thing I will say though is we've worked really closely with the union, with the JobKeeper union, the shoppies over this period. Been tried to keep aligned with them about what we're trying to achieve, and I think that's really been successful. As I mentioned earlier, even with JobKeeper, they were very much front and centre, making sure that we could, have a strategy to deal with some issues that emerged very quickly on that, because we were all working in an environment which was completely, new to us, and there was no consistency. So, it's been really difficult, I would say, on that count.
Just on that issue, I know you and I talked about this yesterday, but that approach you took when you stood your people down at the beginning of COVID, and you had to have the discussions, obviously, with the shoppies about the stand downs and the implications. Can you talk a little bit about how you perhaps lobbied government to get, I guess, them thinking that the idea of JobKeeper wasn't such a bad idea after all?
Yeah. Look, and whatever comments that people have about JobKeeper and its benefits or otherwise, the companies and team members, the thing I focus on is the fact that it did have an absolute impact on making sure that team members felt secure, that they knew they had an income, and two, it meant that they could keep engaged with the employer as well. And I think the union actually took that view as well, that they knew that if they would support this, that it was more likely to get a strong public sentiment and acceptance. And of course, as an employer, it was obviously in our benefit as well from the very reasons I spoke. So we actually collaborated closely. They kept us in touch. They were obviously more aligned, or what I would call a little bit more politically interested in this as well, particularly because being the federal, it was coming from a federal legislative perspective as opposed to a state. But they really worked, as I understand, collaboratively with us to actually lobby, some changes that may have needed to be done, and to make sure that it got across the line, to be honest with you. And I think we were all relieved when JobKeeper came in, because it felt that even from their regard, their membership would be able to deal with some of these issues that came out of COVID as well.
So I think, generally speaking, most people would regard JobKeeper as being a resounding success in terms of its impact in minimising the, economic damage of the lockdowns last year. When this year's lockdowns happened in Melbourne and Sydney, and there was, JobKeeper had obviously disappeared at that point, and the government were dragged kicking and screaming to come up with another scheme. Is that, the one of the key contentions or key ideas behind JobKeeper was that it was to help retain the link between employer and employee. With these new schemes that were belatedly introduced, didn't seem that there was, that kind of logic was underpinning. It was almost like every person for themselves.
Yeah, and you almost lost control as an employer over this. I mean, that has been much more difficult. Is this second, if you want to call it, or the sixth wave that we're experiencing now of lockdown. That has been much more difficult to keep engaged with our team and actually ready to step them up when we needed to. We've almost had to use, I'm not going to say, we've really had to compel them to actually stand up. We'd have to actually say to them, you're still employed by Myer. You have to work, particularly with our online support team. So yes, that has been a lot more difficult when we didn't have JobKeeper. Notwithstanding, I think we know these sort of, dare I say, these government schemes and subsidies have been really helpful from just keeping the economy afloat. We can look at unemployment has really maintained pretty flat from pre-COVID times to now. So they have had an actual positive impact, I think, on generally on the economy.
Just in relation to vaccinations, there's obviously you've got you're following government mandates and government approaches in terms of your staff. What's Myer's policy in relation to unvaccinated customers, those angry customers?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is going to be a real challenge for us. As we've opened up New South Wales, we've actually made sure that we've had security on doors. Clearly, there are requirements on the customer to make sure that they are following the government health orders and the like. We have taken an approach so far to say that we will follow what government health orders will be in terms of our own staff as well. It's interesting that I think many of you have probably read today that the big supermarkets have come out and pretty much started to implement mandatory vaccination across their employees, and I think that will be telling to see how that goes over the next couple of months. We'll obviously watch that emerge, and as a retailer, I will say to everyone who wants to come to Myer over Christmas that we'll have all our Santas will be vaccinated, and of course that is a protection around children not being vaccinated who are meeting with Santa. But in terms of customers, I think that's a real challenge. That's going to see. We've been very fortunate so far that I haven't heard or seen anything come out of New South Wales where that mandatory requirement is in place now. We know, or we anticipate that won't be there forever. But yes, look, one of the things we're trying to do is educate our team around this as well. We don't want our team dealing with angry customers or aggressive customers. That's really important that we protect them from that. Hence why we put security on. We work very closely with our shopping centres owners to make sure that they are also understanding of our implications in our situation. And finally, making sure that our team are trained and signage is there to make sure that people understand our position around that it's unacceptable. And that's why I use that, the customer is not always right. As much as we've been taught over 20 years or so in retail that it is, we are also very conscious that our employees and their safety is our number one priority. There's no question about that.
Just back on the bringing people back to work, you talked about some of the things you've done to maintain engagement during the lockdowns. What have you done specifically to get people to, I guess, stand back up to work? What specific activities have you done to try and get all those people back?
Yeah, and I think I mentioned earlier, we actually started engaging in training. I mean, if you could call it that, or briefings. We'd do these sort of weekly, and we've already started that with Victoria because we know Victoria's probably not too far around the corner from being able to open up to retail trade as well. The one thing I've been really conscious of is, as I said, people have been sitting down, inactive possibly for a long time, and you're about to be asked to go up and start climbing ladders and stocking shelves and what have you. So we have been sending out regular briefings to them, and that's how we engage with them. I think the one thing that we've been really conscious of is the fact that we don't want to use the heavy stick here, but we do have to staff our stores. And so, you do have to actually make, in some regards, say, we're going to have to work you. You need to actually come into work. And most people, I would say, good proportion of them have actually put their hand up and quite willingly come back to work. But the one thing, as I mentioned earlier, was we have to actually guarantee their safety, that when they come back in, they're not going to be exposed to issues around COVID. So what we have done quite a bit around is enforcing things like, the wearing of masks, the social distancing, the sneeze guards in front of the cashier, the point of sales. Just making sure that we're, team members have got, the ability to even engage with our employee assistance program where they need. We've been very, very much making sure that we tailoring and individualizing our comms through writing to each person in a letter, like a personal letter, which has come from our CEO, to really tell them that, it's really important that they look after their health and safety, and, that our priority as a business is their health and safety. So I think focusing on that has given people a sense of confidence that we are looking after them, that it's not just lip service that we're providing to them.
You see some of the changes that have occurred within the business arising from COVID will be retained, and how are you going to sell those changes to your workforce?
Yeah, without question. I think that the big thing that we've really seen is the emergence of, and I think JobKeeper did this as well, the emergence of making sure that you manage your connection with your team members. All right, team members want to feel that, as I said, that they've got a connection with us, with the employer itself. So yes, that will certainly be one thing. I think they want to see visible change, which obviously COVID has actually forced visible change. They want to feel safe. But we've really played up the nostalgia and heritage of Myer as well. I think it's important to know that we feel that there is an ability to provide them with the understanding that Myer is still a really great place to work. Despite COVID and the impacts of the growing online, that our basic our fundamental employee is the one on the floor. They're the ones that are customer facing every day, facing into the customer. So we've really made sure that they understand that that we are there for them. I mean, that's the best way I can put it, actually.
Okay. In reflecting on the last 18 months, what's the most important lesson you've learned?
To be really flexible and resilient, and to expect the unexpected. I think that that's the new way of working, and it's been tough. I think that most people who have been going through the last 18 months would say that this has been the most difficult 18 months of their life, in terms of work. As much as I've embraced this opportunity to be, working from home and having video contact with people as well, it's been really tough from just missing out on those, opportunities to be, collaborating face to face with people and working, in the office. And I think we've really got to acknowledge the fact that people have really suffered from that too. So I think what I've learned is the future is unwritten. We better be prepared for anything that comes our way. And, as I mentioned earlier, online is now sort of like is the way of the future. If you don't have a compelling online offer, you will not survive. And I think that's what we've found as well, as from a business sense.
Well, thank you, Daniel, for your time today. I think you've given wonderful insight into life at Myer and all the myriad of challenges that you've had to deal with, as we said, not only from COVID, but also just the various changes and trading issues that you've had over the last 10 years or so. It's, as I said at the start, it's been a company that's fascinated me in terms of how they've handled all the people issues, because, you hear of changes, it's a constant, all that kind of thing. You've had that constant on steroids, I think. So,
So
it's been a big challenge. So you've done a good job. and we look forward to your ongoing involvement in Disruption Circle. So that brings an end to today's session. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Kate's going to send out an email so we can get some feedback. We always like feedback. It's always interesting to hear what people's views are in terms of the speakers and also just ideas for the future. And as I said at the start of the session, for any of you who missed it, next month's Disruption Circle is our end of season or end of year grand finale, and we've got a special event organised where we've got 10 of our speakers we've had over the last 2 years who are going to form an expert panel, if you like, and it'll be a wonderful event on the 18th of November. So if you could set aside that afternoon, 2 till 4, that'd be we'd really welcome you there, and we look forward to having a great conversation. So once again, thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Daniel.